G. Oh, thank you, Emily. It's a great reminder. So a little bit about me. My name is Iris, and as you might have already found out, I am a career manager for the full-time MBAs at Sauder School of Business. So many of you also work with students directly, obviously, and just want to share a little bit of my experience and why I'm in this space of resilience and positive psychology. So after spending a few years at UBC, my past life was in private sector doing marketing. I realized that helping students with their career direction, building their brand, and creating a strong resume, cover letter, learning how to network, it's not enough. I felt that if the students don't know how to manage their emotions, their stress, and come up with the confidence to go out to create opportunities for themselves, all the things that we teach them about their career and professionally development or academics is going to be compromised. So I happen to have always wanted to do a more advanced degree in the world of psychology. And I thought, well, counseling psychology takes 3 years. That's a lot for my life to dedicate into that. Why don't I look at something a little bit new, a little bit different? So I decided to do a degree in positive psychology, and that's applied positive psychology with the University of Pennsylvania. And I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what positive psychology is in a bit. But just to give you some background, University of Pennsylvania is actually the birthplace, not just for positive psychology, but also for cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a very commonly used technique that for treating mental illness such as depression, anxiety disorder, and even in marriage counseling. Many different fields have found cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, to be very effective. So the people who are actually founders of positive psychology used to be clinical psychologists who have CBT backgrounds, and of course, other methodologies as well. So I found it really important to mention this because some of us, myself included, probably will never really become clinically trained. And sometimes we might feel that a little bit uncomfortable to use techniques that were used in the clinical environment, as we should not be doing that. So I just really want to put that to rest because the people, the psychologists, scientists who worked in that field with the clinical population actually have found that these similar techniques could be adapted for us to work with a relatively, let's say, less pathological kind of population. And we'll get into that more. And also the whole reason for positive psychology to exist is that we can all try to apply that to our everyday lives. So it's not restricted to the professionals, for sure. So this is the time that we'll spend today covering. Number one, we'll cover what positive psychology is and its applications. I'll try to make it a bit narrow because it's actually quite a broad field. And then we'll zoom into the topic of resilience and giving you a bit of a framework of what the 8 protective factors are. And then we'll learn experientially by focusing on 2 of them. And I'll do so by letting you experience one of the workshops that we did with our MBA students. We've done that for a couple of academic years now, so I've learned a thing or two. And by no means an expert in this field, but this is just more for an opportunity for us to start a conversation and learn from each other. There are some other tools, obviously, that can be applied from positive psychology. So for those ones, I'll just do a little bit of a bite-sized sharing in the context of how Sauder integrates that into our students' programming. And then at the end, we'll do a Q&A. All right. Any other questions at this point? All good? Perfect. So let's just jump right into a little bit of a definition for positive psychology. So I'm just going to read it out. It is a scientific approach to studying human thoughts, feelings, behavior, with a particular focus on strengths. Basically, things that goes well with our individuals. Who are the people who are more resilient? What are the organizations or societies that seem to be functioning well? For example, psychology psychologists study that particular island. I can never remember the name, in Japan, right? Why the old people there are they live the longest, right? They sing karaoke. They have a great sense of community, right? So those are the things that psychologists, in the way of mainly in the domain of positive psychology studies. We try not to focus so much on repairing the bad, and because the world already focused on the negative enough. So we're just trying to see, okay, what has gone well, and use that to inform everything else that we do. As Chris Peterson said in this quote, like, we're trying to take the lives of average people up to great, from 0 to 10, rather than trying to bring those who are struggling at -10 to 0. So I hope that this graph can give you a little bit of that idea. In positive psychology, we focus more on asking the question of what's going well, right? What's your dream? What are your aspirations? How do we cultivate hope? How do you cultivate positive emotions and meaning in life, rather than things like, oh, what's your area of improvement? How do you make you feel a little bit better? Positive psychology is actually a resurrection of two forgotten missions of psychology back in the days. So after the Second World War, there are a lot of veterans coming back from the war, especially in the US. And the government put a lot of money into the treatment of mental illness problems, right? So that's where there's a lot of development in the pathology side of psychology, rather than the more positive side of psychological research. All right. So next, I also want to mention that positive psychology interventions can be used in the clinical environments as well, to help people feel better. So I know you support a wide array of student population. Don't be afraid of having these similar types of conversation with the students who are both like doing very well, or those who are not doing quite well. All right. And one of the biggest takeaways, of course, that I went to study and apply positive psychology is that this whole field of well-being skills can be taught to the general public. And especially today, we're talking about resilience, which means the capacity to adapt successfully to adversity. It is something that has been applied in schools and businesses, and we'll learn a little bit more about that. For example, University of Pennsylvania has a Penn Resilience program, and over 25 years of research has shown that it increases well-being and can help lower the symptoms of depression and anxiety. So we're not going to go into all these details. You can find that over the internet. This type of programs actually have even been brought into the military. For example, the US Army had hired psychologists from Penn and design a master resilience training skills. So some of the topics, for example, the one it says ATC here, we'll learn something like that. I just call the abbreviation a little bit differently. So we're learning something that the soldiers are also learning in the Army. And because even though we're not in the battlefield, we do often have to deal with similar, fairly severe stress sometimes too. Resilience can be taught in many businesses like healthcare, even in consulting. So this just to give you an idea. In higher education, Ryerson University actually had a ThriveU program. I would say it's pretty cutting edge, and it was actually started by the director of their counseling center, who was pretty forward-thinking. 15 years ago, she already stepped into looking at positive psychology and trying to lobby. And finally, they have the first 4-credit well-being course that all the students at Ryerson can take as part of their education. But there are other things. Positive education, which also stands for how to infuse positive psychology, infuse a strengths-based approach into everything we teach at school. This can be found in private schools such as the Geelong Grammar School. They're kind of like the poster child of positive education. Very elite, obviously. They're based in Australia. But even in India, for kids who are marginalized, resilience program have been taught over there to help these kids to bounce back. Many of these kids are victims of child marriages. So I just want to share kind of like that broad space that resilience have been applied and researched on. Now, moving on to what really is resilience. We kind of went through a very high level definition, but here is actually based on Karen Reivich and I think it's Matt Chate, I forgot his first name. They did some research and they found that there are 8 elements that contribute to a resilient life, a resilient person. So I'll just quickly go through these. Number 1, self-awareness. So you kind of want to know what you're good at, what are your strengths, what are your aspirations, and even your things that hold you back as well. A sense of optimism, optimistic thinking style, knowing how to regulate yourself when you feel down, right? Like knowing how to think differently, listen to music. Are all options. Mental agility is basically the ability to think very flexibly, being able to consider different kinds of interpretation to a situation and see the world in multiple different ways. So for example, just now my computer is doing that thing. And of course, my natural reaction was that, you're so stupid. Why don't you just restart the computer just in case, right? But I have to stop myself from feeling that way because that mood is going to affect my energy. It's going to make my heart bouncing even faster. Positive institutions are organizations such as UBC or like my school, Sauder, they got an extra day off, for example, right? Doesn't seem really big, but hey, that really makes a difference in my mood coming back to this week. Just having 4 days off it's really great. Connections. I think this one is very obvious. It's like as human, we fundamentally rely on relationships to help us survive and thrive through difficult times. So that desire to belong to a community is actually a basic human need. Okay, physiology, exercises, nutrition, sleep, those are really important. It affects our mood as well. And last but not the least, self-efficacy, which means the belief that we can effect change in our life. So these are all the different factors that, even if the skill that I'm going to teach you today or share with you today may not make sense, it may not resonate with you, then I invite you to come back to this model to think about, is there something that it's easier for me to integrate into the work that I do with my students or the work that I do with myself and my family? Any questions on this one in particular? Good. Okay. So because of time, today we'll only focus on the optimism and resilience, the self-regulation. We'll talk about it together and let you experience that through an exercise. So here's a quick segue, and you'll know why. So like I said earlier, my past life was a marketer. I work in telecom, and the bane of my existence is selling phones and trying to decide, okay, how much to discount an iPhone and discount it for how long. So different from my life right now. And for anybody who has a smartphone, you know that when your phone is going a little bit slow, you want to run some software update, right? It clears some bugs and probably will run faster. However, our brain don't have that luxury. So you cannot reboot it really, right? Like you sleep, you feel better probably, but you need to, if you want to be a little bit more productive, you do need to sometimes question, how do I think differently? That's why people go to personal development, professional development courses or hire coaches. That is all about how to upgrade our operating system in our brain, the way we think. So if we look at the way we think or our beliefs about how the world works or how a particular situation works, it's kind of like that huge piece of iceberg underwater, right? Sometimes we don't even know that we're thinking that way. We just went autopilot and then think that's the way it is. It's reality. So one of the key part of the work that we do together is to help you to recognize that underlying belief that is actually driving your emotions and driving your behavior. And the space where personal development lies is having that self-awareness and learning how to regulate that. Dr. Viktor Frankl, probably many of you have heard about his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He's a Holocaust survivor as well, so, and also a psychiatrist. So Dr. Frankl has this very famous saying, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. So today, we are going to spend the next hour to really discuss how do we reach that growth and freedom and help our students achieve that by examining how we think. All right. So I mentioned earlier that tree, right? That tree of resilience. And we said that we're going to focus on optimism and self-regulation. So I just want to highlight that context again, that we're going to do it in a cognitive way through examining our thinking. All right. So let's look at optimism first. The definition of optimism is that the ability to see opportunities and being able to be resilient in the face of setbacks. Optimism often get a bit of a bad rap, actually. It's misunderstood and sometimes dismissed. So I felt the need to clarify that a little bit more. Optimism is not positive thinking. It does not mean dismissing things that are not going on in our lives. Actually, we need to recognize those things that are negative and also learn how to be realistic as well. Optimism, what really is actually being able to create a kind of a balance between an optimistic way of thinking versus a pessimistic way of thinking. And we'll dive into that a little bit more. Okay, so Dr. Martin Seligman, he's one of the two main founders of positive psychology. He famously said that life inflicts the same setbacks and tragedies on the optimist as well. Sorry, there's a typo here, as well as the pessimist. But the optimist weathers them better. So he actually had been studying optimists and pessimists for over 25 years. And his study revealed that optimists and pessimists look at things just differently. And that's the core of that difference is the way we explain the things that happen in our lives. So he calls it explanatory style, which means how people explain to themselves why they experience a particular event, whether it's positive or negative event. So let's take a look at how this model works in particular. So there are 3 dimensions that kind of characterize our explanatory style. So that includes permanence, pervasiveness, and personalization. And I'll explain what that means in a bit. So for example, when there's a bad thing that happened to us, those with a little bit more of a pessimistic thinking style will tend to think that this thing will last forever, okay? And then they also just like to project this bad event into other areas of their lives. So for example, our students who don't do well in a particular course, they can think that, okay, their other courses are gonna be, they're gonna fail in other courses as well. Okay, personalization, people with pessimistic thinking style will think that it's their own fault, right? Again, feeling down, thinking that they are not very smart compared to all their classmates, rather than having a bit more of that growth mindset, knowing that, hey, it's probably just because this is new to me, right? I was, let's say, a science student before, and I'm just like not good with this kind of courses that requires almost like a very strong kind of critical thinking. There's no black and white answers. I cannot use a formula to interpret things. Okay, so what about optimists then? For these people, whenever there's setbacks, they just know that this will pass. Suffering is temporary. And they also are more able to compartmentalize their setbacks rather than doing what the pessimist would do. I wouldn't say they are not responsible. They just don't take on everything. Okay. For example, I have students who don't get many interviews, or they interview and then they didn't get a job. Right. So the optimistic students are better at just thinking that, well, maybe I'm just not a good fit for the company, right? They prefer somebody else. Or in my class, there are students who have experience in healthcare. The company prefer that. So they don't think that it's because their bad performance or them being not good enough. All right. So when it comes to good events, this thing basically reverses. So for example, when things are going well, the pessimists still have a little bit of that thing. I was like, I don't know. Yeah, maybe I just get lucky with this job offer. I'm not sure about my future. So they're constantly having a bit of that catastrophic way of thinking and just never believing that good things would happen to them. And that basically would just impact the pervasiveness. They think that they only get lucky with this particular course. Maybe they're going to fail next time, right? The personalization piece don't apply very well in this situation. But when it comes to the positive students, right, optimistic students, they would tend to think, oh, I've done well. I've got potential. I believe in my ability, right? That's kind of where that self-efficacy is. Because they have achieved a kind of performance standard, they believe that in the future, they could replicate that kind of success. Okay. And even in other areas of their lives. And they're also better at thinking, at patting themselves in the back without appearing arrogant. All right. So I've been talking a lot. I kind of want to pause a little bit to see whether anybody has any questions on this particular model or comments. Great. Just looking at the chat. Thank you, everyone. Well, I'm going to move on then, and feel free to hold a question for the next little break. So what do you do then now that you know people who are pessimistic think differently than optimistic, and maybe like I would think that even when I was younger and probably still now, I may appear like an extrovert and bubbly. Sometimes people think that I'm quite a positive or optimistic person, but there are certain areas in my life where I can always gravitate towards the worst case scenario. So I'm constantly regulating myself and questioning my thought. So let's get into that. The ABCD tool, and I'm sharing the student edition right now, is basically an acronym, and it has its roots in cognitive behavior therapy. So the A here stands for adversity or activating event. Basically, it's something that irks us or something that makes us unhappy or just not feeling good, okay? A belief is just our interpretation of that, how that caused us to think. And consequence is what does this whole thing does to you? It can be behavioral, it could be emotional. And the dispute is basically where that self-regulation is. It's what do we want to do with this? The core of that learning. So to give you an example, students not getting an interview call, they may think that my internship search is in trouble. I have lots of students feeling that way right now. It's incredible how it happens all the time, obviously. But this year, probably because of the pandemic, they feel that way even more. And then they start to have this, what we call the counterproductive thinking. And it's also not very accurate. When there are 2 or 3 students in their WhatsApp group getting interviews, somehow they just think that the entire class already got interviews. And I have to always say, no, there are only 3 people that we know of who got offers. And of course, the stress of doing that is that it's just kind of hard to concentrate, right? You may not sleep well, or some people would even just like give up to say that, you know what, I'm not going to do an internship, I'm going to do something else. So the example that I give to you just now is me providing evidence. So that is one skill that we could use with our students, right? What is the evidence of your internship being kind of over, like gonna fail, right? Actually, in the class, there are only this number of people, and we always show stats to say, actually, people got internships throughout from the spring, not all before February. So chill. This is not the time to stress yet, but of course, trust the process and do the work. Alternatives. Sometimes we tend to think that there's only one way to success. So what we do with our students is to help them think of different options to solve their problems, to broaden their thinking. Implication stands for when you think this way, what is useful? What is going to happen then if this is the case? So we kind of help them unpack the future and loosen their really almost like certain deeply lodged limiting beliefs, and the more that you talk to the student and unpack what they're thinking about, the more you can find ways to help them find a way out. And usefulness, I mean, this one is just the last one is like how useful is this? Just you thinking that you are the least capable person in the class. Are you just gonna give up or what? So really asking that powerful question can sometimes get someone out to say, you know what, it's useless. I'm just trying to be hard on myself. And yeah, so that's kind of a student edition. And I thought why don't I share a bit of an advisor edition in case it's helpful. So this is kind of like what I'm feeling quite often, especially when it comes to spring. For example, I feel on certain days when we have to work in a different time zone, many of our students are still in other places of the world. I feel so busy at work that I barely have time for my family. So I started thinking that I wish I can get my boss to lighten my workload. But I'm not gonna bother. It feels weird. It's uncomfortable. It's kind of making me sound lazy to my boss, right? And I really don't know what can be done to change the situation. And I just don't believe that my boss can make something happen, right? And of course that could be stress, frustration. I may feel a little bit disengaged because of that. So when I really write these things down, it starts to help me realize that, well, I'm just assuming that my boss couldn't do anything. What if I was wrong? Maybe he can talk to some other directors on our team and then figure something out, right? I should at least voice my concern rather than waiting until I'm really, really frustrated about my workload. This process of disputing my thought can help me feel more in control about my situation and lead to some more effective problem solving. You just reminded me of one thing that we need to watch out for using ABCD tool is that you don't want to dispute something that you cannot really change. And even for example, like a family member passing away or someone who's really going through a very difficult situation, you kind of use your intuition as a human being and your relationship with that person to think about, is this the right time to dispute their thinking? You will need to listen and to their views first to lower their guard before you jump into the reasoning side. Simple reasoning, rationality doesn't always change people's mind because a lot of the times we're so emotionally attached to a particular belief that we have. All right, this is great. Thank you, everyone. So the next, let's say 15 minutes or so, I'm going to quickly zoom through, I would say like 10 minutes to zoom through our programming with some other examples of how we use positive psychology to support our students. And we will wrap up with a Q&A. So I'm going to share my screen again. Give you a bit of examples and apologize that I will be going through because there's just so much content. I want to give you a bit of a preview. All right. So I thought I'll do that in the context of our student journey. It's probably more concrete that way. So as an overview, because this year we make some changes because of the pandemic, we start our students in January rather than September. So what do we do in the summer and the fall then? We build a Canvas course for them so that we can engage the students before they officially start school. And resilience is one of the topics that we cover. We also try to have discussion boards and certain assignments that fosters community building using Canvas. Great tool. So our opening week is January. Like I said earlier, we have a resilience like level 1 course, which is basically what you have gone through. There's some little snippets that I took out. I'll quickly share with you later on. We also cover a bit of mindfulness because sometimes when we are so automatic with our thinking, it's really hard to unpack the beliefs, right? The emotions, and mindfulness is a great exercise for us to become more in touch with our feelings and the way we think. We also have a positive introduction. I put quotation marks there by asking our students to tell each other a story about their strength and character. We do that in breakout rooms as well, and I'll share with you a little bit more later on. Oh, I just accidentally click on something that shouldn't be clicking. Okay, there you go. And then career day in March, that's what we're gonna do. Building on the resilience ideas that we just discussed, we're gonna weave in a little bit more of emotional intelligence kind of content. And then one thing I didn't mention is that this kind of well-being skill development is really something that cannot be achieved right only after one workshop. So our plan is to drip feed information throughout their academic journey, their career journey. And even like that grounding exercise that I did with you, right? We try to have 5 minutes of that at the beginning of each little workshop, even a resume workshop, cover letter workshop, when people are trickling in super stressed. We try to do a little bit of that to model that kind of behavior of regulating their breathing and to remember to take care of their body. Sometimes we use music, which is a great tool to regulate your mood as well. And then we have one-on-one coaching throughout, obviously, and try to introduce those topics that we talked about as much as we can. So I would like to do a little bit of a demo on that Canvas course that I told you about. Do it really quick. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. So we have lots of topics on Canvas. Like these are a lot of career stuff, right? Knowing yourself, strengths, personal branding. So I expanded this resilience topic. And because we know that our MBAs are oftentimes very ambitious and they probably don't care about resilience. So I added this like high performing thing just from a branding perspective to remind them that even if you don't think you need resilience, don't you want to be high performing? And a lot of these tips would help you with your performance as a leader. So we start by going through movement, nutrition, and rest, and got them to start thinking about what is a routine that you can set up because school would be really busy. And we do a discussion board. So they start sharing their tips over here, talk about productivity tips, got them to do a discussion too. And then this positive introduction thing is basically the exercise I mentioned earlier. We get them to prepare for it. And during opening week, we put them into a little group. So I'll touch on that in a bit. From the mind, how they think, right? There's actually a very cool free exercise that you can look up. It's called Saboteur Assessment. You can just Google Saboteur Assessment. It's like a 10-minute free assessment that helps you identify your common themes in the way you think, the way you sometimes hold yourself back. And I get students to put in their discussion, but this one is not a public one. Only I get to see it. And there's a fear setting exercise. So we kind of at least use this to give them permission to really explore that part of their life and remind them that your career, your academic journey would not be fully successful without looking at these things. We also go into the thinking styles. They have a discussion there as well, thinking traps. I'll touch on this. And this is just to give you a snippet of what we have been doing using Canvas, because it can create a little bit more interaction. So next one, this is just an example of that positive introduction exercise. So we get the students to take a character strengths survey. And earlier, as I mentioned, right, positive psychology is very strengths-based. And it's our opinion that for people to truly connect with each other, they need to really learn about each other's humanity. Like, what is beautiful about that person's lives? And that's how we find commonality. That's how we get moved by the other person. And with all our students starting virtually, we felt that this could be a very meaningful exercise. And this is actually the probably a 15-year tradition for the school that I went to, the Master of Applied Positive Psychology. Every single year we use this in orientation, and it just never failed to bond people who are from like completely different areas of the world. And because these 24 character strengths are strengths or virtues that were commonly held across the major civilizations. That's how these things were actually created. So our students tell those stories, and as they tell each other stories, we ask the rest of the group to write down the other strengths that they see in their classmates, and we get them, put them into a Google Doc, and then eventually created a word cloud so that we put that on Canvas. So they always get to be reminded of what's really beautiful about this class. And moving on to a bit more resilience topics, we did a little bit of an intro. So in that second level resilience course, we introduced more thinking traps. So this is not just the optimistic versus pessimistic. There are actually other cognitive distortions. I think those of you who are familiar with counseling or CBT probably have heard this. So we're just getting the students to have discussions about, okay, what is a mistake that they tend to do, right? And by having these discussions, they start to become more agile in noticing their counterproductive ways of thinking. We also tell them that, hey, jumping conclusion is like the queen or king of thinking traps. So just remember not to jump into conclusions. We share with them some other mental agility strategies. So these are some stuff that, like, I think later on we can probably share this deck. Like, these are some very cool strategies that I learned from school. So some prompts, right, that you can even teach your students. So if, for example, if you're going through a difficult time, you can ask this person to tap into their strengths, tap into, like, I think Gina was saying, right, what is something you have control over, or trying to reframe, or the plan, right? If you are someone who tend to be a little bit anxious, then help get someone to help you come up with a plan. So if this A happened, you'll do B, right? Evidence we already touched on. This is just an example of the emotional capital report that I alluded to. So we have the let's say ability as Sauder. We're very lucky that way, able to afford this emotional capital report. So we got to do that with our students and debrief it over the summer. So this is a bigger photo. So it helps our students get to know their inner focus, outer focus, and other focus. These are 10 different kinds of skills. All right. And in our workshops, actually, this is part of the resilience workshop that I would have gone through with you if we had time. So we teach them, help them demystify some of the common misconceptions about mindfulness. So not going to go into details, but basically we teach them that the meditation process is a process of noticing things that distract you and learning to regain focus with a mentality that is non-judgmental, that was full of compassion. I think, Frishta, you mentioned that, right? So that's really what mindfulness is about, the non-judgmental, the kind of curious kind of attitude is what we want to cultivate. And actually the more studies have shown that the more people practice mindfulness, it creates a much positive school environment. It's not just the individual. Students are more likely to be willing to take perspectives from others, and also from like other classmates, and also the staff members as well. They're just like less likely to be so reactive. And of course, some of them are more science-minded, right? So I went into the research of what mindfulness can do to help them with their memory as well, executive functioning, their studying, decision-making. All right, that's kind of like a really quick overview, and I'm almost ready to wrap up. So I just in summary, I would like to remind all of us, we're all educators, that oftentimes we forget that to educate is not just to nourish. There are actually two Latin roots to the word educate. So we're not just here to impart knowledge to our students. We're also here to draw out the strengths within their character, to help them notice what's great about them. They do have the resources to flourish in their lives. So just see this as an invitation for all of us to think more towards that strengths approach. And there are lots of tools out there that willing to share and start a conversation with everyone. And that's it. We can get into some Q&A if you have any questions or comments about how we can encourage our students to develop their resilience skills. Any thoughts? Well,
Iris, question, who was it that developed the Canvas content? Was that you, or do you have a team that helped develop it?
Yeah, so it was mainly me, and then my manager, Ivan, who's the associate director of our MBA team, also put in a lot of work in more of like the infrastructure, getting the IT side set up with our learning and development team. But yeah, we all work together, a couple of us, to think about the let's say infrastructure, right? Like what are the topics, which one would be the main components, where do we go deep? And then we talked about what kind of assignments will really get people to think, so that they're not just checking off the boxes and trying to go through the motion.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Let's see if there's anything in the chat.
Iris, will this will this Canvas course be, is it only for Southern students?
Yeah, just the way Canvas works is that when you set it up, you have to open it to a particular student group, right? But if you're interested, I'm trying to see whether there's a way to export that into a PDF or something. I knew there's a way. Somebody did that. So if you're interested, feel free to email me.
Okay, I will.
I put my email up here. Yeah, we'll figure out a way.
Thank you so much. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And please feel free to get in touch. I just want to say we haven't get this fully figured out. We're just adding a little bit of something new every year. And you might even have some great ideas to collaborate, to bounce ideas off. So please get in touch. Awesome. Thank you, everyone.